swears by in the Quran when he says, وَالْفَجْرِ وَلَيَالٍ عَشْرٍ, by the dawn and the 10 days. And scholars of Tafsir, they say that these days are the 10 days of the Hijjah and can also include the last 10 nights of Ramadan. And the story of the Hijjah and Hajj is the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So when Sheikh Ammar, I don't know if he asked me, did he ask me this one? He told me. He said, "Hey, I'm going to Hajj, you're going to do +1." I think that's how the convo went. But, of course, we wanted to make it Hajj related, and what better way to do so than the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Now, I personally love the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. It was my favorite story growing up. I say I, but he and my wife named our first son Ibrahim. So he's waving in the back. Alhamdulillah, my wife agreed to name him Ibrahim. It was actually my dad kind of hijacked it. We were expecting, this will be my one tangent, inshallah. Unless, I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to try and make this my one tangent. But when we were expecting, my dad goes, "Did you think of any names?" And I said, "Yeah, we're thinking Ibrahim," and before we could even say another name, he started calling my wife Ibrahim and stuff like that, and started calling the unborn child at the time Ibrahim. So we just kind of had to go with it. But alhamdulillah. And when I was, anytime I listen to the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, I can listen to it over and over and over again. It doesn't matter whether it's in English or Arabic or who's telling the story. It's something that I personally love to listen to again and again. And I found some things kind of interesting, especially when I was going over it this time. It's one of those few stories where a lot of people have the timeline of events confused. And that's because there's actually different narrations as to when certain things occurred. So hopefully we can go over some of those, not confusing, but timelines, those events that you're not sure exactly when it occurred, but it doesn't really change much when it comes to the overall story, except one part, and I'll explain what that part is, inshallah. So, when it comes to Ibrahim alayhi salam, he is from the lineage of the son of Nuh, who went by the name of, and just to remind you, if it's your first time sitting in one of my talks, I like to ask a lot of questions, so if you know the answer, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you, or if you want to throw it out, then go ahead. I'm not sure exactly how you guys like to do this, but the son of Nuh alayhi salam, that Ibrahim alayhi salam descends from, is known as what? Sam. Right? Sam, which is where you get the term Semite from, people who descend from Sam. So that's why people always say what's so ironic, you can't call Arabs anti-Semites, they're Semites themselves. Arabic is a Semitic language. So, they come from Sam, and he was born, which was in modern day Iraq, in the area of Babylon, right? Babylon. That's where he's from. Some people may say that no, he was probably from an area more towards the Iraq and Syria border, but most of the historians agree that Ibrahim alayhi salam was from Babylon. And one thing I want to preface, and this is something everybody needs to learn about, when it comes to number one, tafsir of the Quran, and number two, studying the history of our deen, and especially the history of the prophets, stories of the prophets. The thing to remember is that our main sources are the Quran and the Sunnah. Whatever we find in the Quran, whatever we find from Hadith, we know that to be true, right? With Hadith, of course, you have to check authenticity. If it's in the Quran, 100%. There's no doubt about it, whether it's true or not. If it's said in the Quran, then it happens. In Hadith, of course, if it's authentic, then take it. And then you have other sources, mainly what's called Riwayat Isra'iliyat. Has anybody heard this before? Riwayat Isra'iliyat? Okay, so Riwayat Isra'iliyat, I like to translate as biblical sources. Right? These are narrations from Ahlul Kitab. That's why it's called Riwayat, narrations. Isra'iliyat, from Banu Isra'il, or also Ahlul Kitab, Christians and the Jews. Because when the Prophet ﷺ moved to Medina, he was then more exposed to Christians and Jews, especially Jews, because you had 3 Jewish tribes in Medina, and many of them ended up converting. And you have Abdullah bin Salam, who himself was a Jewish scholar. Some say he was a rabbi himself, others say he was just a very learned scholar of the Jewish religion. So sometimes the Prophet ﷺ himself would even ask Abdullah bin Salam and other, Jewish converts or Christian converts about what their religion says about certain issues. And then, of course, as Islam spread, there was more exposure. You're around more Christians, more Jews. So you have a lot of these biblical narrations that come into these stories. What do the scholars say about these narrations? Does anybody know?
Sheikh Ammar once mentioned that we sometimes we neither accept it nor reject it.
لا نصدق ولا نكذب. لا نصدق ولا نكذب. That means we don't affirm it, neither do we deny it. So how do we reconcile this? Yes, sister.
It's something like take lessons from it as long as it doesn't conflict with things that we already know.
Yes, very good. So you can learn from it, and if you see a biblical source, if it agrees with what's already in the Quran and authentic narrations from the Sunnah, then okay, so you can take it. And if it goes against what we believe about Allah and His messengers and His prophets and His angels, because if have any of y'all read Genesis before?
Yeah.
Right. So when it comes to Old Testament and stories of the prophets in the Bible or the Old Testament, there's a lot of things that go against what we believe about our prophets and messengers, right? Some things that, it doesn't sit well. You feel insulted for the prophets that these things are mentioned. So those things, clearly, we can't believe in those things. We can't take it or affirm it. And another way I like to approach it is that if you see a source, and it's kind of like with the seerah or with any history, a lot of times you'll see in the Arabic it says qila, not qala. Qila means that, it was said. It's just hearsay, or this news came to us, not that, it's narrated from this person, from this source. Like, it's just hearsay. So with the biblical sources, you kind of just take it as just info in the story. Once it passes the filter, like, okay, is this appropriate? Does it fall in line with what we believe in our religion, our iman, right? Belief in Allah and His angels and His messengers and His books. Does it follow along with what we believe? And okay, it's part of the story, right? Is it true? Who knows? Even if it is true, does it affect our iman in any way? No. Right? So most of what we find from the scholars and the books of the scholars, for instance, one of the most famous books of our history is from Imam Ibn Kathir, Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, the beginning and the end. Right? Imam Kathir basically goes over all of history, from the creation of the heavens and the earth, all the way to the day of judgment. And people have extracted from Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya the sections about the prophets and called it Qasasul Anbiya, or stories of the prophets. And this is available in English. You can find it anywhere. You can find PDFs online. And you can read it yourself. It's something that, especially with kids, we want our children to read up on the stories of the prophets as much as they can. Because then they'll learn and they'll appreciate what they read. And these are, of course, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only reveals these stories as a means for us to reflect and ponder over and learn from the past mistakes of the previous nations, where mostly were destroyed, and those who believed and were successful, and those who disbelieved and were punished. We have to take all of these lessons from an early age. So now with that out of the way, you'll hear things, especially with a lot of the major prophets from biblical sources. You may hear some things, and I may say some things, and I'll mention that, okay, this is actually from biblical sources. Because in the Quran, is very clear, and in the hadith, it's very clear. If you hear something that's like, oh, I've never heard that before, or maybe I did hear that, but it never sounded right, then just know that's probably from a biblical source. Next question. Does anybody know how many times Ibrahim alayhi salam is mentioned in the Quran?
Toast face.
So say 17.
And
Higher.
you're 70.
Almost 70, yeah. So when it's in the high 60s, right? 68, 69 times. So Ibrahim alayhi salam is mentioned in the Quran 69 times. We know Musa alayhi salam is mentioned the most. But Ibrahim alayhi salam, he's mentioned a lot of times as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes Ibrahim alayhi salam. First, I'll start off with how he's described in Surah Al-Nahl. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan qanitan lillahi hanifa wa lam yakun min al-mushrikeen. Indeed, Ibrahim alayhi salam was a model of excellence. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He uses the word ummah. The translation that's usually given is model of excellence. Now, ummah, what does ummah mean? Nation, right? What does it mean to call a person a nation? The scholars of language, Arabic language, they give two reasons. Number one, Ibrahim can be considered an ummah because some of the scholars say that he is a nation himself. He was sent at a time where the entire world was worshipping idols, and it was just him at the end, right? He didn't have any followers or anything like that. He was just a nation unto himself, right? That's where the title comes from. So Ibrahim alayhi himself is a nation. He will be resurrected by himself. You know, every prophet will be resurrected with their ummah, right? So it said that Ibrahim alayhi will be resurrected by himself. That's one explanation. From this translation, we can get the other explanation, that he is a model of excellence. Now, ummah can mean that you as an individual are worth an entire ummah. Right? You as an individual, you can have the goodness of an entire ummah or an entire nation. You can have the strength of an entire nation. Right? There's a line, it's not really poetry, but it says, وَلَمْ أَرَى أَمْثَالَ الرِّجَالِ تَفَاوُتًا لَدَى الْفَضْلِ حَتَّى عُدَّتْ أَلْفْ بِوَاحِدٍ. What does this mean? That it gives an example of what it means to be described as an ummah. Like you don't really see the virtue or the benefit of a man, right? It's impossible to count the virtue of one person, right? Who until you count 1,000, basically you're worth 1,000 people. Okay, so that's where you get this explanation from. Ibrahim alayhi salam as an ummah had the virtue and the goodness and the taqwa and the tawakkul and the greatness of an entire nation just in one individual, in Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, شَاكِرًا لِأَنْعُمِهِ اجْتَبَاهُ وَهَدَاهُ إِلَى صِرَاطٍ مُسْتَقِيمٍ. He was utterly grateful for Allah's favors, so He chose him and guided him to the straight path. وَآتَيْنَاهُ فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَإِنَّهُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ لَمِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. We blessed him with all goodness in this world, and in the hereafter he will certainly be among the righteous. Right? And when it means that he was blessed with all goodness in this world, it means that he was given honorable mention and a righteous family. And there's other ayat that also speak to Ibrahim alayhi being blessed with goodness in this world, which can mean honorable mention aside from a good family and a righteous family. What is that honorable mention that Ibrahim alayhi was given in this world? Do anybody think of an example? It's something that we do daily. Salah, right? And what part of the salah? Salah Ibrahimiyya, right? That's what it's called. The Desis call it Durud Ibrahim, right? Salah Ibrahimiyya. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. This is something that every Muslim recites every single day, multiple times a day. So it's like how our beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we also send salah and salam upon him every single day, as well as Ibrahim alayhi salam. So this is the honorable mention that Ibrahim alayhi salam has been given. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثم أوحينا إليك أن اتبع ملة إبراهيم حنيفا وما كان من المشركين. Then we reveal to you, O Prophet, saying, follow the faith of Ibrahim, the upright. You'll hear Ibrahim alayhi salam described as being Hanifa. Right? In the beginning it said, إن إبراهيم كان أمة قانتا لله حنيفا. Oh, I just realized I didn't translate that whole ayah. Indeed, Ibrahim alayhi salam was a model of excellence, meaning he was a ummah, he was worth an entire nation, qanitan lillah, devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is another description of Ibrahim alayhi salam. He was completely devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was nothing that would keep him from fulfilling his purpose as a prophet and messenger of Allah and telling others to worship Allah, to worship Him alone. Perfectly upright, Hanifa. Okay? That's what it means. وَمَا كَانَ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. And he was not a mushrik. He did not associate others with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So at the other ayah when it says أَنِ اتَّبِعْ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا, follow the faith or the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the upright, وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, who was not one of the polytheists, who was not one of the mushrikeen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also describes Ibrahim alayhi salam in Surah Hud. He says, إِنَّ إِبْرَاهِيمَ لَحَلِيمٌ أَوَّاهٌ مُنِيبٌ. That verily Ibrahim was forbearing, and he was tender-hearted, and he was ever turning to his Lord. In a narration from Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, he said, قال جاء رجل إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال يا خير البرية فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ذاك إبراهيم عليه السلام. So a man, it was narrated by Anas bin Malik radiallahu anhu, that a man came to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and the man said, O best of creation, Ya khayr al-bariyah, O best of creation. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam responded by saying, that was Ibrahim alayhi salam. And then another virtue of Ibrahim alayhi salam is that the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, when we're all resurrected on Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the day of resurrection, Ibrahim alayhi salam will be the first to be clothed. On the day of judgment, Yawm al-Qiyamah, the day of resurrection, every single one of us that is going to be resurrected, we're going to be resurrected what?
Yes.
Completely naked. But we'll be so terrified that we won't even notice. We're not going to know. We're not going to care. We're not going to care about our parents. We're not going to care about our siblings, our children. Everybody's just going to be nafsi, nafsi. They're only going to be concerned with themselves, and everyone is so frightened and terrified that they don't even notice that they're completely naked. And the first to be clothed on that day will be Ibrahim alayhi salam. So now, let's get into the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And I thought that I would break it mostly into his youth and then his older age, because there's a bit of a gap. Right? We're not sure exactly how old Ibrahim alayhi salam is at some of these events that take place. But we know that at some point he was really old, and at some point he was really young, and he was somewhere in the middle. So first, inshallah, we'll try to get into the youth of Ibrahim alayhi salam, but especially because today is, it's the week of Eid. Eid is on Sunday. There's people who went for Hajj, the first 10 days of the Hijjah. So I also wanted to leave some room for a little bit longer of a QA session in case anybody had any topics they wanted to cover concerning the Hijjah. Right? I feel like it's only right that we give it some time, inshallah. Now, the first instance in which we have Ibrahim alayhi salam speaking at a young age was with his father. Who was his father? What was his name? Azar. Very good. It's mentioned in the Quran, Surah Al-A'raf, إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ لِأَبِيهِ آزَرَ أَتَتَّخِذُ أَصْنَامًا آلِهَةً. But I'm going to get to that part later. That's not going to come yet. Azar was also known by another name. He's mentioned by scholars as another name. This is for brownie points. Anybody know that other name? It's pronounced two ways. I'll be really impressed if you know this name. Anyone? Anyone want to give it a guess? Yeah, it's too hard to guess. So, other scholars mention that he was also known as Darah or Darah with a Hamra. Darah or Darah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions his name in the Quran as Azza. So we know that, okay, his name's Azza. Maybe he had a second name, maybe it was a nickname. Allahu A'lam. Yes.
What did Azam mean?
Azza?
Yeah, Azam.
I'm not sure what it means. Because we have to remember something else too. A lot of these names, we may not even know the meaning because they're from a different language, right? So, Ibrahim, Ismail, Ishaq, Yaqub, these are all non-Arabic names that are just mentioned in the Quran in Arabic, right? The only Arab prophets were Hud and Salih. There's also narration that Shu'aib was an Arab prophet, but you can argue that because there's also many statements from the scholars that say that every prophet after Ibrahim alayhi salam was from his lineage, which is why one of his nicknames is Abul Anbiya, father of the prophets. Right? You can't say that about Nuh alayhi salam, you can't say that about Adam, because not, all of their sons were prophets, whereas Ibrahim alayhi salam, both his sons ended up being prophets, right? And then from then on, every single prophet was from his lineage, right? So you can say that Nuh was the father of mankind at some point, and Adam alayhi salam is the ultimate father of mankind, but Ibrahim alayhi salam is described by many of the scholars as Abul Anbiya, the father of the prophets. So Azar, I'm not sure what it means. I'm sure if somebody did a deep dive, they could find some statement, but who knows? Allahu A'lam. Because I think even as a race, Ibrahim alayhi salam, they were Assyrian, right? A-S-S-Y-R-I-N. Whatever the people of Babylon were. Like Babylonians, Mesopotamians, I guess. It's a different race, different language, we're not even sure. There's not, I guess people do translate their language, but that's usually something that's very niche for scholars and whatnot. So it's not something that's as common today. So if you want to look it up, let me know what you find. I might look it up myself later. Azar was the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and he was an idol maker. Right? A lot of us know the majority of these bits and pieces of the story. His father was an idol maker, and he expected his son Ibrahim to help out family business, right? You expect your kids to work in the family business, so he would make the idols and he would try to get Ibrahim alayhi salam to sell the idols. It's mentioned that Ibrahim alayhi salam had siblings. There's some narrations that say that he was the middle child, like 8. Other narrations say that he had a brother after him, but who had passed away, or he had an older brother that had passed away and had left behind a son by the name of, anybody know? I don't want to give you a guess. He was also a prophet, Lut alayhi salam. So some people say that Lut was his cousin. I think the stronger opinion is that he was his nephew. but cousin, nephew, what kind of
False to say.
So, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was, and it mentions in the Quran, and I'll get to the ayah later, but it mentions in the Quran that he was given discernment at a very early age. Right? Basically, he was somebody that could already tell between right and wrong from a very early age. He was very smart, and he knew how to talk, he knew how to debate. You know, sometimes, I'm not saying this about Ibrahim alayhi salam, this is completely separate. And sometimes you have those kids that always have a response to everything. They always know how to talk back. And you just like, listen to your Alex, please. But, not you.
This is a feeling.
You don't talk back. No shit. Sometimes. He's at that age. Middle schoolers. So, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was very, very smart. And he knew, he could already tell between right and wrong from a young age. So when his father was trying to get him to get into the family business, we have to see how Ibrahim alayhi salam speaks to his father. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he described Ibrahim as being very soft-hearted. And listen to how he talks to his father, and listen to how his father talks back to him. In Surah Maryam, beautiful exchange with Ibrahim alayhi salam. He says, إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِ لِمَ تَعْبُدُ مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ وَلَا يُغْنِي عَنْكَ شَيْئًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, remember when Ibrahim alayhi salam said to his father, Ya abati. Now, for those who studied Arabic or know Arabic, what's the difference between Ya abi or Ya walidi and Ya abati? What's the difference?
It's a more dear form here.
Yes. Right? It's more dear. It's more loving. It's more, you know, it like softens your heart. Imagine if your child comes to you, if you're a parent, and says, yeah, abati, for the fathers. Right? You almost feel like you're gonna melt. It's like, okay, whatever you want, I don't even care at this point, I'll give it to you. Right? It's not gonna work on. Yeah, abati. Right? It's kind of like, I guess nowadays a modern way to, it would be like when a kid comes to their parent and says, hi, Baba. Right? It's kind of like that. Oh dear father of mine, why do you worship what can neither hear nor see nor benefit you all? Right? And Ibrahim alayhi salam, you'll see, he repeats this a few times. This interaction between him and his father and him and his people in Babylon, or Babel, he repeats it pretty often. You know, why do you worship that which cannot see, nor hear, nor benefit you, nor harm you? It's mentioned in other places. And scholars will say that we already know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he describes himself as As-Sami' and Al-Basir. Right? He's all hearing, all seeing. But when Ibrahim alayhi salam says, why do you worship something that can neither hear you nor see you? This shows that it is aib, it's unbefitting, it's almost shameful to have a God that can't even hear or see you. Right? So like, if you worship God, he has to be a God. Like, it's inevitable. You just can't worship a God that cannot see nor hear you. And it does not benefit you at all. Ya abati, he says it over and over again. Ya abati, inni qad ja'ani min al-'ilm ma lam ya'tika fattabi'ni ahdika siratan sawiyya. Oh dear father, I have certainly received some knowledge which you have not received. So follow me and I will guide you to the straight path. Ya abati, la ta'bud ash-shaytan, inna ash-shaytana kana lir-rahmani 'asiyya. Oh dear father, do not worship shaytan. Right? They don't realize they're worshipping shaitan. They're worshipping these idols, but it was influenced by who? By shaitan. Right? If you know the story of Noah, he came generations later to tell the people. Well, first he went to the people at the time of, a little bit after the time of Noah, and he said there were these pious people who used to pray and worship Allah all the time. You guys should build a statue in their memory so that it was from the time of Noah alayhi salam. And then Shaitan came a few generations later and said that, you know what these statues were? You know who these are? These are gods that your forefathers used to worship. And you'll see that reoccurring theme within the story of Ibrahim as well. So don't worship Shaitan. Inna Shaitana kana lirrahmani asiya. Surely Shaitan is ever rebellious against Ar-Rahman. Ar-Rahman, he doesn't even say Allah, he just says Ar-Rahman, the most compassionate, especially merciful. Right? The most merciful. He doesn't say Allah, he's bringing mercy into this, that worship Allah and you will not be from those who worship the one who is rebellious against the most merciful. He brings mercy into it, especially with his father. Ya abati, inni akhafu an yamassaka adhabun min ar-Rahman fatakuna lish-shaytani waliya. Oh dear father, I truly fear that you will be touched by a torment, a punishment from the most compassionate. Even when he's talking about punishment and torment, he still calls Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by Ar-Rahman. And I fear that you will become Shaitan's companion in hell. How does his father respond? He says, قَالَ أَرَاغِبٌ أَنْتَ عَنْ آلِهَتِي يَا إِبْرَاهِيمُ. He says, he threatened, how dare you reject my idols? Oh, Ibrahim, I know no term of endearment, nothing, merciful, nothing compassionate towards his son. And there's even one opinion, it's not a very strong opinion, that Azar may not have even been his father. He may have been like an uncle that came into his care when his father passed away. But and that he's referred to his father as his caretaker, his uncle who's taking care of him, basically adopted him. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly says to his father, so we can conclude from that that the stronger opinion is that Azar was his actual father. But can you see, he says, do you reject, or do you want me to reject, or how dare you reject my idols, O Ibrahim? And then he takes it even further. He says, if you don't stop, if you do not desist, I will certainly stone you. I will stone you. Right? Of course, if you grow up in an immigrant household, you might have heard worse threats before. But he probably meant it. He started harboring this anger and resentment towards Ibrahim alayhi salam. And you see that with people who are upon falsehood. You're not asking them to commit some physical feat or to do something that's financially strenuous or anything like that. You're literally just saying that there's one true God. These are the signs, these are the reasons. These are the reasons why you shouldn't worship anyone else. So you should follow guidance and follow the truth and worship Allah alone. They get so angry, they get so mad, they get to a point where it's like, be quiet or else I'm going to kill you. And that's essentially what he's saying. He's saying that if you don't stop, I'll stone you to death. So be gone from me for a long time. So get out of my face, I don't want to see you. How does Ibrahim respond? Again, this is in Surah Maryam, guys. Surah Maryam itself is a very beautiful surah. And then you have this story of Ibrahim, which is beautiful on Ibrahim alayhi salam. It says, قَالَ سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكَ قَالَ سَلَامٌ عَلَيْكَ سَأَسْتَغْفِرُ لَكَ رَبِّي إِنَّهُ كَانَ بِي حَفِيًّا. Ibrahim alayhi salam responded, peace be upon you, I will pray to my Lord for your forgiveness. I will pray to my Lord for your forgiveness. He has truly been most gracious to me. And then he said, وَأَعْتَزِلُكُمْ وَمَا تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ وَأَدْعُو رَبِّي عَسَىٰ أَلَّا أَكُونَ بِدُعَاءِ رَبِّي شَقِيًّا. As I distance myself from all of you, from whatever you invoke besides Allah, I will continue to call upon my Lord alone, trusting that I will never be disappointed in invoking my Lord. فَلَمَّا اعْتَزَلَهُمْ وَمَا يَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. And then he says, after he had left them and what they worship besides Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how he granted him children, he granted him Haque and Yaqub, and he granted him, we showered him, وَوَهَبْنَا لَهُم مِّن رَحْمَتِنَا وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُمْ لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ عَلِيًّا. We showered them with our mercy and blessed them with honorable mention. And I already told you guys what the honorable mention is. A lot of scholars say that every single day we recite As-Salat Ibrahimiyya, and this is the honor that Ibrahim a.s. received because of who he was. After this, Ibrahim a.s. he decided that he was starting to get sick of his own people. They're all on falsehood, they're all worshipping idols, they're all, it doesn't make sense to him. He thinks that this is ridiculous. How do you even bow down to something that does not hear or see or harm or benefit you? It doesn't drink, it doesn't eat, right? There's also stories mentioned that Ibrahim alayhi salam, he thought that, okay, you have these idols, my dad made these idols and he's trying to get me to sell them, and people, they give offerings to these idols, right? It even happens to this day, right? You have people with their gods and they put offerings in front of them to cook food, and he's like, okay, one day he thought, let me just put a bowl of water in front of it, right? Or some food or just anything, let me just put something in front of it. And he thought that, let me see what happens. And he tells the idol, drink, drink, have some. And what does he see? He sees a mouse come and drink from the water, and then scurry out. He said, you can't even prevent the mouse from drinking your water. How are you going to benefit me or do anything for me? Right? And this is something that even people in Makkah, when idol worship was rampant in Makkah, they would see things like this as well. That's why you had some of the people who were like, there's something not right with this. They were very few, right? They were very few. And they were also called the Hanifs, right? The people who were upright. Basically, they would have all these crazy offerings for the gods, and they would leave, there was one god that they would leave camel's milk for all the time, and somebody witnessed foxes coming in the middle of the night, not just drinking the camel's milk, but then peeing on the idols. And I was just thinking, like, what is this? How is this a god when you have animals coming and urinating on them? Right? First it steals their food, then urinates on them. It's just shameful. Right? Anybody who has half a mind would think that there's something not right with this. So then, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Anbiya, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا إِبْرَاهِيمَ رُشْدَهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَكُنَّا بِهِ عَالِمِينَ. And indeed we granted Ibrahim sound judgment. Rushd, right? Rushd is a way to say guidance, right? But it's basically knowing between right and wrong. Right? When you need to seek counsel, when you need an answer, right, and what to do with your life, they use the word rushd for this. So Ibrahim a.s. he knew between right and wrong. He knew what was right. He knew what to do from very early on. He had sound judgment from early on, for we knew him well to be worthy of it. We knew him well to be worthy of it. Ibrahim a.s. is said to be the best of creation after Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Have you all heard of the term ulul azmi min al-rusul in Arabic? The great messengers. Right? We know there's a few messengers, not as many as prophets, but from them you have 5 that are known as ulul azm, the greatest of the messengers. Can y'all guess the 5? Who's number 1? Muhammad. And who's number 2? Ibrahim alayhi salam. Who are the other 3? Musa, Isa, and Nuh alayhi salam. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ وَقَوْمِهِ مَا هَذِهِ التَّمَاثِيلُ الَّتِي أَنْتُمْ لَهَا عَاكِفُونَ. Remember when he questioned his father and his people, what are these statues to which you are so devoted or devoted? قَالُوا وَجَدَنَا آبَاءَنَا لَهَا عَابِدِينَ. Right, this is the pattern that you see with a lot of the mushrikun or idolaters that are mentioned in the Quran from the stories of the previous nations. They said what? We found our forefathers, our fathers and their fathers and all the generations before them, we found them worshipping these idols. قال لقد كنتم أنتم وآباؤكم في ضلال مبين. Ibrahim responded saying, indeed you and your forefathers have been clearly astray. قالوا أجئتنا بالحق أم أنت من اللاعبين. They asked, have you come with us with the truth or is this a joke? قال بل ربكم رب السماوات والأرض الذي فطرهن وأنا على ذلك من الشاهدين. He replied, in fact your Lord is the Lord of the heavens and the earth who created them both, and to that I bear witness. وَتَاللَّهِ لَأَكِيدَنَّ أَصْنَامَكُمْ بَعْدَ أَن تُوَلُّوا مُدْبِرِينَ. Like Tallah, it's a type of swear. You can say Wallah, Tallah, Billah. And then some scholars even mention even if you say Allahu, even though it's a question, it's kind of like a swear as well. But the three main ones are Wallah, Billah, and Tallah. Tallahi, that's what it says. قال تالله وتالله لأكيدن أصنامكم بعد أن تولوا مدبرين. Then he said to himself, by Allah, I will surely plot against your idols after you have turned your backs and gone away. فجعلهم جثاثا إلا كبيرا لهم لعلهم يرجعون. So he smashed them into pieces, except the biggest of them, so they might turn to it for answers. Now, I'm going to jump to another part, which mentions the same story. And I want to point out from the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, early on, his exchange between him and his father, and exchange between him and his people, this is the part that is repeated more than once. There's another part that's repeated more than once, but not like this. They narrate almost the entire story. The Quran narrates almost the entire story from his exchange with his father and his people. The other story that's mentioned more than once is when Ibrahim alayhi salam received news about the coming of his son Ishaq. And we'll get to that in the night, probably next week, inshallah. So in Surah Shu'ara, I almost said Shu'ara, right? It's in the 19th juz. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ Ibrahim. Relate to them, O Prophet, meaning of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the story of Ibrahim. إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ وَقَوْمِهِ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. Do you guys remember hearing that a little bit earlier? What are you worshipping? He said to his father, what are you worshipping? Besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قَالُوا نَعْبُدُ أَصْنَامًا فَنَظَلُّ لَهَا عَاكِفِينَ. We worship idols to which we are fully devoted. Now, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he asked his people this as well, but he asked his father first. قال هل يسمعونكم أو يدعون قال هل يسمعونكم إذ تدعون. Do they hear you when you call out to them? Like if you make dua to them, are they actually hearing you? Have they ever responded to you? أو ينفعونكم أو يضرون. Can they benefit you? Can they harm you? قالوا بل وجدنا آباءنا كذلك يفعلون. So we found our forefathers doing this. We're just doing what our forefathers did. قال أفرأيتم ما كنتم تعبدون. Ibrahim responded, have you really considered what you have been worshipping? Do you actually see what you're doing? Open your eyes, look at what you're doing. أنتم وآباؤكم الأقدمون. You and your ancestors. فإنهم عدو لي إلا رب العالمين. They are all enemies to me except the Lord of all worlds. Then he starts to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. الذي خلقني فهو يهدين. He's the one who created me, and He alone is the one who guides me. وَالَّذِي هُوَ يُطْعِمُنِي وَيَسْقِينِ. And He's the one who provides me with food and drink. وَإِذَا مَرِضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِينِ. And when I'm sick, He heals me. وَالَّذِي يُمِيتُنِي ثُمَّ يُحْيِينِ. And He is the one who will cause me to die and then bring me back to life. He says, وَالَّذِي أَطْمَعُ أَن يَغْفِرَ لِي خَطِيئَتِي يَوْمَ الدِّينِ. And He is the one who I hope will forgive me on the day of judgment. Now, in another place in the Quran, when I mentioned Ibrahim a.s. said to himself that when you guys are all gone, I'm going to do something about these idols. So there's an Eid or celebration that his people used to observe in honor of the gods. Right? They would gather, they would have all the gods, and they would go out and party and celebrate outside of the town for whatever reason. They would leave the town and they would go and party all night. So when they were going, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he stayed behind. And they asked him, what's wrong? And he said, قال إني سقيم. He said, قال إني سقيم. He said, I'm sick. I feel sick. Now, I'm going to mention this again next week, but Ibrahim alayhi salam, I'm going to ask you all, was he really sick? No. He wasn't sick, but he said he was sick. Is this considered a lie? Right? Ibrahim alayhi salam, there's a hadith that the Prophet said, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he lied on 3 occasions. Now, to use the word lie is not always accurate, right? It's not black and white. There's something called tawriya, right? So when it comes to Ibrahim alayhi salam, there's two explanations for him not telling the truth. This one is weaker. Some of the scholars say that it was before he became a prophet. I don't subscribe to that. The other one makes more sense. It was something known as tawriya. He said something that had more of a hidden meaning behind it. When he said, I'm sick, he wasn't sick in the sense that he needs to rest and he needs medicine and he needs to off some pills. It's more that I am sick and tired of you people. I'm sick and tired of all of this idol worshiping that is completely foolish, and I need to do something about it, so I'm not going to join you. So I'm sick and tired of you guys. That's what he was trying to say. So when they went out, Ibrahim alayhi salam smashed all of the idols except the biggest of them all. Right? And it's funny, you get these random descriptions, and like I said, a lot of these are from biblical sources, but it said the biggest idol of them all had these ginormous ears. Right? So that it could hear everybody's gods. And that's probably why Ibrahim alayhi salam said so many times, does it hear you? Does it actually hear you? It has these giant ears. Right? So he had an axe and he smashed all of the smaller idols and left the big one and put the axe at the big idol. So when the people returned, they saw everything smashed up and they said, قالوا من فعل هذا قالوا من فعل هذا بآلهتنا إنه لمن الظالمين. Look at the words they're using. They said, who dare do this to our gods? They must be an evildoer. Must be an evildoer from the Zalimeen. One of them said, قالوا سمعنا فتى يذكرهم يقال له إبراهيم. This is proof that Ibrahim alayhi salam was very young, as they use the word fata. Right? What does fata mean? A young boy. Fata is a young boy, probably not even at the age of puberty yet. Allahu a'lam how old Ibrahim alayhi salam was. Because some scholars even mention that he was probably 16 around the time. But we don't know, right? I mentioned there's certain things that we just don't know the exact details of it. Does it matter if he was 16? Does it matter if he was younger? Does it matter if he was prepubescent? No, it doesn't matter. So قالوا سمعنا فتى يذكرهم يقال له إبراهيم. I heard that there was a boy that they called Ibrahim. Right? And I heard that people were speaking ill of him because he was going around talking bad about our gods, telling us to stop worshiping them, dissing our gods. Right? So they thought it was him. قالوا فأتوا به على أعين الناس لعلهم يشهدون. They demanded to bring him before the eyes of the people so that they may witness his trial. قالوا أأنت فعلت هذا بآلهتنا يا إبراهيم? Did you do this to our gods, O Ibrahim? And Ibrahim alayhi salam responded by saying what? قال بل فعله كبيرهم هذا فاسألوهم إن كانوا ينطقون. Now this is actually line number 2. Right? He replied, and he said it sarcastically. Can you imagine? You can probably imagine. He probably had, a smirk on his face, and he said, "Why don't you ask the big one?" Right? He said, "No, the one who did it was the biggest of them all." Right? The big one did it. So ask them if they can talk. So now he's challenging them. Right? You guys worship this God. I'm telling you that God smashed the rest of the smaller gods. Right? It's kind of like with younger siblings and they try to steal your food. Probably got upset, smash them. And you make up whatever story you want. And when it comes to these two lies, because even the word that's used, and Ibrahim alayhi salam himself, he says that, I lied 3 times. There's the famous hadith of Shafa'ah. You guys know this hadith? On the day when there's no intercession, mankind will start running to different prophets. Mankind will go to Adam. And Adam will tell them, no, I can't do anything for you. I was kicked out of Jannah. They all have their reason, explanation. When they get to Ibrahim alayhi salam, he said, no, I lied. I can't do anything for you. Right? So even he himself admits to this, but we know that it's not lying in that sense. Because even the Prophet ﷺ, he said that Ibrahim alayhi salam, he lied 3 times. Two of them were for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And these were the 2. Inni saqim, I'm sick and tired of you idol worshippers and worshipping these idols. And the big one did it. It's just to prove that, look, you guys are on falsehood. You guys are wrong. You're worshipping these idols that can't do anything from you. There's only one God, one true God. He's the only one worthy of worship. I'm trying to show you the truth. So then, ask the big one, in كَانُوا يَنْطِقُونَ, if it can really talk. So then, the people, they came back to the senses. فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ فَقَالُوا إِنَّكُمْ أَنْتُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. They came back to the senses and they looked at each other and they said, you guys are the wrongdoers. You're the ones who messed up. We should have had somebody protecting our gods. Now they're admitting that these gods can't do anything for themselves. We should have had something protecting it. ثُمَّ نُكِسُوا عَلَىٰ رُؤُوسِهِمْ لَقَدْ عَلِمْتَ مَا هَؤُلَاءِ يَنْطِقُونَ. Then they quickly regressed to their original mindset, arguing. And they said, you already know that these idols can't talk. They had to admit it. Right? I mentioned Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was smart, he was discerning, he knew how to talk, he knew how to debate. Right? I don't think there's a prophet of Allah or a messenger of Allah that debated more than Ibrahim alayhi salam debated. So they had to admit these idols can't talk. And Ibrahim alayhi salam says, قَالَ أَفَتَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَنْفَعُكُمْ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَضُرُّكُمْ أُفِّلْ لَكُمْ وَلِمَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. So he said, you guys, you worship instead of Allah that which can neither benefit nor harm you in any way. They said, أُفِّلْ لَكُمْ, shame on you. Shame on you. And whatever you worship instead of Allah, do you not have any sense? Do you not think? You see what you're doing? Does it not, tickle your intellect that you're worshiping these idols? And then the people, of course, they got very upset. I mentioned, nobody who is upon, some type of falsehood or idol worship or another religion, it's almost impossible to tell them these things, and they don't get almost biased. You see with his father, you see with his people. They didn't think that throw him in prison or will teach him, will show him the right way. No, they said, قَالُوا حَرِّقُوهُ. قَالُوا حَرِّقُوهُ. What did they say? They said, burn him. That was their conclusion. He showed us up, he made us feel dumb and stupid. Let's just burn him. Now, this portion of the story, this is where you have one of those timeline confusions. Did they do this immediately, or did this happen a little bit later? And I'll get to why in a moment. They said, قَالُوا حَرِّقُوهُ وَانْصُرُوا آلِهَتَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ فَاعِلِينَ. Throw him in a fire, burn him to avenge your gods. Right? Because they probably also know deep down that these gods cannot avenge themselves. They can't do anything for themselves. Whereas, time and time again, we have examples from the Quran and the Sunnah, our history, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took matters into his own hands, figuratively, and he protected what needed to be protected. Okay. Famous story of the elephant, Surah Al-Fil. Does anybody remember the dua that Abdul Muttalib made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It was along the lines of that we are the lords of our camels and our herds and stuff, so we'll protect this. You're the lord of the house, the Kaaba, so protect it how you see fit. Okay. And then what else subhanahu wa ta'ala do? He sent small birds with the clay and killed the entire army of Abraha. So they wanted to throw Ibrahim into the fire, and now this fire, these are details that we don't get from the Quran or from Hadith. They say that the fire, it took a month to build up. They gathered wood and they lit it up and they kept it going and going, and it was huge. And it was so hot that people could not come near it. They felt like their faces were going to melt off. Birds cannot fly over it. Any bird that flew over it would fall straight into the fire. They couldn't go near it, so then what happened? They had to build a catapult to sling Ibrahim into the fire. And some scholars even mention that Shaitan had to come and inspire them or influence them to build a catapult. So maybe they didn't even know what catapults were back then. Right? So I guess it would be funny if you had a question going back to the catapult and somebody wrote Iblis. So can you imagine? They had to put together this contraption, this catapult, to sling Ibrahim into the fire. And there's another thing that we do get from the Sunnah, that, subhanAllah, animals are very pure creatures. They're a creation of Allah, they don't have a will of their own, but anything that they do, whatever they do, is in obedience and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they remember Allah in their own way. So they're inherently good. So it's mentioned that when the fire was made, the animals were trying to come together to blow out the fire. Right? The animals came together to try and blow out the fire, except one. What animal is that?
Salamander.
Salamander. It's a gecko, right? It's a gecko. What's it called in Arabic? Was up. Right? Wow, za, ghaib. The gecko was the only animal that was blowing on the fire with the intention to make it stronger, not to blow it out. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said that you're allowed to kill geckos. If you see them, kill them.
No.
If you see them, kill them.
That's it.
And I know it's summertime, right? They're everywhere right now. Does that mean that if you have Geico insurance, you have to give it up? I feel like that would be a question I would get. But no, you can kill geckos, and you're good. Because mostly you're not supposed to harm animals, right? But the gecko, because it's inherently evil for blowing into the fire to fan the flames instead of put them out, we're allowed to kill geckos. So they build a catapult, they throw Ibrahim salam. And I'm going to try to wrap up this story. There's one more story that comes into this, and I'll wrap it up inshallah, because I do want to give more time for Q&A. They threw him, and as he's going, there is a narration that said that as he's being flung, right, he's flying through the air. It was said that Jibreel came to him. We don't know if Jibreel came to him or not, that's not confirmed. But he came to him and he said, "Can I help you?" And Ibrahim said, "No, I'm good." And then he said, "Did you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?" This is the part that majority of scholars say is not true, it's fabricated, or it's not, you can't confirm it anyway. Ibrahim responded by saying that "Ilmuhu bihali la yughni bisu'ali." When you hear it, you kind of think that, okay, it kind of sounds made up anyway. That means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He knows my condition, so it doesn't matter if I ask Him or not. There's no point in me asking Him. But the scholars, they mentioned that this is not true. Ibrahim did not say this. But of course, also because the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned, Ibn Abbas narrated that when Ibrahim was thrown into the fire, he said one dua. What did he say?
Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel.
Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is enough for me. He is sufficient for me. And He is the best of wakeels. He will take care of my affairs. And that's why it's mentioned in the Quran, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسُ إِنَّ النَّاسَ قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ فَاخْشَوْهُمْ. The Prophet's father by himself, Prophet ﷺ, on multiple occasions. So he said the exact same thing. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. And that's all it took. Ibrahim alayhi salam went into the fire, and as he reached the fire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ. So we ordered, O fire, be cool and safe for Ibrahim alayhi salam. This also tells us, right, it's part of our faith, our iman in Allah. Nothing happens without His will. The fire will not burn you except by His will, right? What else? You won't taste except by Allah's will. Medicine will not heal you except by Allah's will, right? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the fire, don't burn, it's not going to burn. There's even been mention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to say bardan wa salaman, right? Not just be cool for him, but be peaceful, be safe. Scholars have mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had to include salaman because fire, being a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if Allah commanded it to be cool, it may have gotten so cold out of its obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it may have frozen Ibrahim alayhi salam to death instead of burning him to death. So not just be cool, but be peaceful, be safe. So Ibrahim alayhi salam landed in the fire and everything was cool, right? Some scholars describe this as if he was just sitting in a garden. He was just chilling. Right? He was tied up, shackled. They were so surprised. Everything burnt off, the shackles, the chains, everything was burnt off. Ibrahim alayhi salam was fine. And he just walked out. And the people were dumbfounded, right? Can you imagine somebody just why this is something that, maybe David Blaine might try to attempt? That guy's probably a jinn or something. But can you imagine just seeing somebody walk out of the fire? You chained him up, you shackled him, right? It sounds like magic, but this is all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Chained and shackled and just walks out free. And he's fine. Nothing happened to him. Now, the timeline here, you're not sure what happens first because some scholars say that the king of Babylon, or Babel, witnessed this when it happened, and he called Ibrahim to his court. Now,